Take your two collar pieces right sides together and stitch around the outside edge. You can place a mark where you're going to pivot at the corners and stitch using a 7mm seam allowance. When you get to a corner, take one small stitch at a 45-degree angle. This just helps you to get a nice sharp corner when you bag your collar out. Clip across the corners, so a couple of millimeters away from the corner and then either side of the corner. If you had a thicker fabric, then you might take more than one stitch across the corner at a 45-degree angle. Your collar the other way out to the right side, and you can use a point turner to help you push the corners out, or very gently use a pin to help prise the corner out, being careful not to push it out too far. There is a series of notches on your front pattern. The first notch is 7mm in and represents the seam allowance. The second notch is 3 centimeters away from the first notch, and that is a fold line. If you fold it on that line, that allows the centre front to be in the middle of the 3 centimeters and allows 1.5 centimeter button extension. The third notch, the notch after centre front, is the stitching line that you stitch down to hold the placket or the facing in place. Stitch the shoulder seams from the neck line down to the armhole and then overlock the edges and press towards the back. While you are at the iron, you can press the edges of your collar, so you can lay it out and press the outside edge open, which helps to get a nice crisp edge around the outside, and then fold it back wrong sides together and give it a good press to make it nice and neat for stitching. Stay stitch around the neckline edge of the garment to prevent stretching, and stitch about 5mm in from the edge. The pin stitch around the outside edge of the collar, and then you can stay stitch the collar edges together. Alternatively, you could top stitch around the outside edge of the collar. All stay stitching must be within the seam allowance so it is not seen when the garment is finished. Do a quick quality check just to make sure that your collar points are the same shape and the same length. Pin your collar stand with the garment starting 7mm in from the front edge of the collar stand, and then make sure that you match your shoulders and centre back marks and also the centre front marks. Then stitch on the collar stand with a 7mm seam allowance. Once the collar stand is stitched on, then check that you have no tucks or pleats in your neckline of the garment. Press the seam allowances towards the collar stand. Pin your collar to the garment and collar stand with the upper collar closest to you, facing up. Again, matching all notches, and the front edge of your collar has to match the centre front notch on your collar stand and garment. Stay stitch the collar to the garment just to hold in place using a 5mm seam allowance. Press up the lower edge of the other collar stand and then pin to the collar stand and collar that are attached to the garment, matching all the notches. Both my collar stands have been interfaced, but lots of times, depending on the look that's required, there would be only one collar stand interfaced and one side of the collar interfaced. This would be the collar stand that would be interfaced to match the upper collar when they're sewn together. Stitch all layers together using a 7mm seam allowance. Trim off around the curved part of the collar stand, leaving approximately 3mm seam allowance. Turn through the other way to the right side and then pin the edge of the collar stand over, just covering the seam line of the neck. Pin stitch through all layers, starting at the shoulder line, which makes it not visible when you're looking at the garment on the hanger. So stitch right around the collar stand. Reduce your stitch length when you are going around the curve of the stand to help maintain an easy curve, and then you can use small tools to help you manipulate the fabric underneath the presser foot. Lastly, do another quality check of your collar and collar stand shapes and lengths.